Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we have a special show for you this week. We hope you're enjoying your 4th of July and Canada Day and having a good weekend. And we're going to get you caught up on all the action with the Ducks, everything that happened on the first day of free agency. We're also going to talk about stuff around the league, get to your questions, and, talk about what the Ducks are going to do next, hopefully, as they still have some cap space to play with. So we'll start off with the first day, Eddie. The big news that came out, we knew it was coming and it happened, was Cam Fowler got an extension for 8 years, $6.5 million. What did you think about this? I know most people were pretty happy to see that Fowler's going to be a Duck for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think it's around what we thought. I think it's the top end of what we thought he was going to be. I don't think anybody thought it'd be more than 6.5. I think I had him around early on 5.5 to 6. But I think it's fair. Obviously now becomes the top paid defenseman on the Ducks, longest contract by a fair bit. So, but I think he's deserved it. That will take him to 32 or 33. So that's a long contract to sign. But he's just getting into his prime, like Bob Murray said yesterday. That'll take him right into about the end. So when he's 33, it depends on the player, but he'll probably be at the point where that contract stops making sense. So I think it's good for the Ducks, and obviously with the cap going up, it's going to be less impactful. And really, with getting rid of Theodore, it looks like the future of the Ducks on the left side of defense is going to be Fowler and Lindholm. So getting him for 6.5 when you see guys like Vlasic, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, going for $7 million for 8 years at 30 years old, I think it's a pretty good deal for him to sign at this point.
What amazed me too about this, Eddie, is, just last season before this, they were talking about, the trade rumors of Fowler. Then Fowler has a really great season last year. He gets 39 points. This is the highest total he had since his 40-point total his rookie season. He plays well offensively and defensively. Unfortunately, of course, he was injured, didn't play all the playoffs. But, just really stepped up his game, and it's just crazy to see. And he talked about this, and some of the comments that he talked to the media about the turnaround and how it went from, possibly being on another team to now being on the Ducks. And like you said, he's on this team, granted he fulfills the contract, but he's on here longer than Perry, Getzlaf, Kessler, Raquel, all these other players that the Ducks have signed through 2021 or 2022. It's just amazing that he got that deal. I agree with you. I think it's a good deal. It's a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be, not as in a bad sense, but I think in terms of the age, and like you said, we'll talk about some of these other contracts that happened and unfolded on the first day of free agency. But overall, I think it's a great deal. Good direction for the Ducks. And like you said, you got Lindholm and Fowler back there. It's going to be solid for the Ducks on the blue line. Yeah,
and really this deal takes him probably set to be the Ducks' all-time leading scorer in defenseman by the time this contract's finished, you would assume. He's pretty high up there already, and you would think at already having 217 points with the only guy in front of him being Scotty Niedermayer at 264, he's definitely going to clear that by the time this contract's done. So it's great to have him here for 8 more years. He like, from the comments he said yesterday, he obviously loves being here. He loves the locker room. He loves being in California as well, but that's not all part of it. So it's great, and you can't complain when you have Fowler and Lindholm as your top 2 guys on the left side, and you've got Montour coming up on the right. You still got Vatanen if he's going to start the season with the Ducks or not, but Larson coming up as well. So the Ducks are set on defense. The future's looking pretty bright, at least.
Well, and we talked about the defense, and if the Ducks were going to do anything, and obviously they didn't really add any players, but they extended Fowler. The other area that we had talked about was obviously the goalie situation. We knew Gibson being the starter, of course, and the Ducks having no backup, and the Ducks took care of that also on that first day of free agency, Eddie. They went out and got Ryan Miller, which was pretty much expected. You saw Bob McKenzie tweeting that out a couple times during the week. Other people were too, and then he tweeted it out early that morning before the actual official day got underway. So Bernier leaves. He had his $2 million deal. He is ended up going to Colorado, if you didn't know that. And Miller comes in at $2 million. So basically, the Ducks, in my mind, and you and I talked about this, got pretty much the best backup goalie out there, and they got him at the same price. So the Ducks cap remains, at the same, right around 5.5, 5.7 million.
Yeah, and this deal finally happened. I mean, it's been rumored for a couple seasons for him coming here. Obviously, his wife works in Hollywood, so it's been rumored for a while that they've wanted to come here and that Anaheim would be the destination, and obviously it finally happens in free agency. But, I think they did. We talked about this on the last podcast, and we thought that they wouldn't be able to afford him and that, he might end up wanting too much money, around 3 or even close to the $4 million he had before, even with his play declining. But then right after that, we heard the rumor that it was going to be $1 million with some bonuses, and then obviously the final contract is 2 years and $2 million. And I still think it's a pretty good deal. I mean, he's not going to play the 50 games that he played the last 2 seasons. Gibson, is going to be the starter for sure, and he's going to probably play about 50 games, if not a little bit more, for this next season. So that leaves Ryan Miller playing about 20 to 30, and I think that's going to really suit him. I think he's a great goaltender still. If he comes in and only plays about 20 to 30 games, he can make a huge difference. And, he's got that experience as well. Coming to the playoffs this time, obviously Bernier was the guy who had to come in, had very limited playoff experience. And now you've got Miller to come in if Gibson struggles, and he's been there, he's done it. He's gone far with the Sabres, and I think that this is a great move for the Ducks. And at $2 million for only 2 years, I mean, it's like dumping off Bernier and taking half and getting a better goalie.
What's interesting too is about this. We'll kind of take one fan question early about this too, Eddie. We had Victor ask. He goes, "What do you think about Miller pushing Gibson in terms of maybe taking over his position, or kind of like that Anderson Gibson thing, splitting time? Do you see any of that maybe unfolding this season at all?"
I could see it because Miller's been a starter before. I mean, he was a starter last year pretty much in Vancouver because he played 54 games. He was a starter the season before that because he played 51. He's been pretty much a starter for his whole career. So if Gibson struggles and Miller can step in and play well, yeah, I could see it happening. We saw it happen for a bit, obviously, when Gibson went down with injury, when Bernier came in and played really well last year. But, if anybody's going to be able to push him for a starting job, it's got to be Ryan Miller because he's been a starter for pretty much his whole career.
Yeah, and don't let some of the numbers fool you out there too, because I know some people go back and they look at the wins and the losses the last couple of seasons. They're like, oh, well, Miller's win-loss record's pretty terrible, and I mean, yeah, of course it is, but he also played on Vancouver, and we all know how they've done the last 2 seasons. They've been terrible. So don't read too much into his win losses. His save percentage was still up there, 9.4, 9.14, 9.15, somewhere in there. Goals against, 2.7, 2.8 in that range. So not spectacular numbers, but, still decent numbers for a goalie. Like I said, ignore the win-loss type deal because it's just with Vancouver. We know what's going on with Vancouver and how they've been. So that was the second big news of the day. And then, or at least for the Ducks, that is. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other stuff we're going to cover around the league. But for the Ducks, those were the 2 big moves. Then they also made some minor ones too, Eddie. They signed 2 forwards, Derek Grant and Michael Liambas. Not 2 big name guys, but Nate Thompson left and went to Ottawa. If you didn't hear about that, so this Derek Grant guy is a guy that they signed to a 1-year deal, $650K. He played 40 games for Buffalo last season. He's a left shot center. And he's a guy that can win faceoffs, is a good penalty killer. Does it sound familiar? So he could maybe fill in Nate Thompson's spot on the 4th line, Eddie. He may also play in San Diego too, but depending on what they do with all the centers, if Raquel plays wing or center or whatnot, we may see Grant on the 4th line to take Thompson's place.
Yeah, I think he probably starts in San Diego. It all depends me because they have the option of maybe putting Wagner at center.
Right.
They played shot center a bit last year. Didn't really work out that great. But then, like you said, you've got Vermette. You could put Raquel at center. And obviously Getzlaf and Kessler are going to play center. So there's a lot of options for them. It's just, it's a depth forward pretty much. He is on a one-way deal. So anytime, if he does start in Anaheim, he's going to have to clear waivers to go back down. But it's very doubtful unless he plays strong in Anaheim that he's going to be picked up. So, I think it's an okay signing. Pretty much fills not to the same extent, but fills what Thompson brought to this team. Vermette really fills that role anyway that Thompson leaves behind as a fourth line center, and then it all depends what the Ducks do after that. If they decide to play Raquel as a third line center, or they decide to, like I said, play Wagner or Shaw. So I think they're okay. Mike Liambas, I doubt we see much of him this year. From what I've heard, he's pretty much an enforcer, and we've already got one of those in Bull who seems to play in the lineup more than we'd like. So I don't think I think both of them are, more focused on the goals, with Derek Grant possibly having the option to come up and play maybe 20, 30 games at most with the Ducks this season, depending on injuries.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they'll both spend a majority of the time in San Diego. I just thought that the Derek Grant one was kind of interesting because when I read some of the scouting reports and things about him, and it's just like he sounded like Nate Thompson. So he, like you said, he could fill in on the fourth line, but he's not going to be up there full time with the Ducks, that's for sure. Like you said, maybe Wagner or Shaw on that line, or as we'll see with Raquel and Vermette, how that all plays out if they're on the third line together or if they both go to the center role. So that's what the Ducks ended up doing for the first day. And some people asked about that, Eddie. We had Phil ask us, did we think that were we surprised about what the Ducks had done on the first day and if they should have done more? I say yes and no, Eddie. I think the Fowler extension was expected, so we were glad that was done. I think getting Miller as the backup was the best thing the Ducks could have done because they got him at the same price they had at Bernier. They added some depth players like we just talked about. And then as far as, the only thing I think that they still need to do is they need to go get a forward, Eddie, and there's plenty of them out there, and that's what I think that they're trying to do. And that's basically the first day how I saw it. I thought they did well. I think they accomplished almost everything on that day.
Yeah, I mean, really, I would have been surprised if they signed a forward with all the news that kind of came out the night before free agency. You look at what Gagne signed for, because I kind of hyped him up on the last podcast. He signed 3x3 with Vancouver of all teams, but I don't think the Ducks were comfortable giving him 3 years at $3 million. You look at Kunitz going only for $2 million for 1 year to Tampa Bay. I'm not sure if the Ducks were in on that or not. It's something they definitely could have afforded, but there must have been a reason that they didn't go that route. Whether it be Kunitz didn't want to come here, wanted to go to Tampa Bay, whatever the reason being. But, I think signing Ryan Miller was great. We knew they would sign a goalie. At the time of the last podcast, we were leaning towards Anders Nielsen. And then obviously the stuff came out with Miller, which was great. Signed a couple depth players, which we just mentioned. So now, like you said, it all comes down to a forward. And there's not much available. All the news right now is just centering around Marleau, and the Ducks are in on him. Dallas is apparently in on him, but they're waiting on Radulov's decision. The Leafs are still on Marleau as well, and he's just coming to a decision, which it might come today, it might come tomorrow. We don't really know. So if they miss out on him, they still do. We still believe they need a forward, and it's going to be interesting to see which route they go.
Yeah, a lot of the news yesterday did center around San Jose. Basically, Thornton ended up going, or not really going back, but he's staying with San Jose for 1 more year at $6 million. Vlasic signed that huge deal that you had mentioned earlier. The $7 million 8-year deal. So now they're going with Burns and Vlasic on their blue line as their two big guys for the long term, and then Marleau, and that's the one that's been bouncing around, still out there. San Jose still has $11 million in cap space, so they can definitely sign him if they want to. It's kind of interesting now that Thornton went back for 1 year. So now does Marleau go back there for 1 year, Eddie, or do you think he goes to another team and then maybe Thornton follows him after the 1 year to that other team? It's kind of a weird situation going on here. It's just like the Marleau watch now because all these other players have gone everywhere. And I would like for him to, come to Anaheim. Obviously, we talk about left wings and we look at what's out there. And as you mentioned, there's not a whole lot left. A lot of these players got picked up. A lot of the former Ducks and whatnot have gone on to other places. So that's the key. I think Marleau is the one that the Ducks are going to shoot for. If they don't get him, though, Eddie, the pickings are slim.
Yeah, and it's a weird situation. The rumored deal that San Jose is offering was about 3 years, around $3 million, is what kind of keeps popping up from San Jose. And, I think it's a hard decision for him. I mean, he's been there his whole career. It's hard for a guy to leave a team after being there for his whole career, especially at 37. 3 years would take him most likely to retirement, and that's a hard deal to pass up on. But again, you got to think too. Does he think he can win the cup with San Jose in those 3 years? That's probably why he's thinking about maybe going to Toronto or going to the Ducks or going to Dallas. Two teams in Dallas and Toronto that are trending upwards, and obviously a team in Anaheim that almost won it all this year. So I think it's interesting. I mean, if he goes to Toronto, they have the cap space to maybe hold him for 2 years. I think the Ducks would be betting a little bit too much if they went for 3 years, maybe two, around $3 million as well. So he's probably got about the same in value across all four of those teams. But I think the term, and then obviously the issue with staying in San Jose, I think that's probably what he's deciding on right now. But yeah, if the Ducks do miss out on him, there's not much out there. There's UC Jokinen, there's P.A. Parento, there's a couple other guys as well, but there really isn't much when you get away from Marleau. So it'll be interesting to see if they go and get one of those other guys in free agency, or if they maybe go and they look for a trade again. I don't really know.
Yeah, some of those other names out there too. The one that's been joked about a lot is Yager. He's still out there. Obviously, he's been tweeting about the lack of phone calls that he's been getting. So he's still there. That's one that I know. I've been talking to several people about Yager, and they're like, "Oh, it'd be great. We get Yager jerseys and yada yada yada." But honestly, I mean, you're going to get Yager. It's going to be like a 1-year deal. I mean, I don't know. I'd rather have Marleau for 2 or 3 years than Yager for 1 year. I mean, that's just the way I look at it. But if you look down the list of people that are out there, the UFAs, and especially the left wingers, like Eddie said, there's not a lot. The drop off after Marleau is pretty significant. I mean, you've got Drew Stafford's out there, right wing more so than left wing, but he can play both. You got Jokinen, as you mentioned. Shane Doan is still floating out there, also right wing and left wing. Vanek, another guy that maybe you would sign for a year, but he's kind of been up and down all over the place. You've got Yuri Hudler, he's out there as well, left wing, right wing. So you've got a handful of guys out there, but the drop off is just significant. I mean, after Marleau, so I think it's really the Marleau sweepstakes right now. And some of the other guys are gone too. Gagne, the one that we were big on, went to Vancouver. Versteeg went to Calgary, so he's gone. We talked about Bonino. He ended up going to our favorite team, Nashville. And then Kunitz went to Tampa Bay. So, a lot of those guys that we had talked about on the show last week, have all been picked up. So it's slim pickings after Marleau.
Yeah, and really, if I was to go with one after Marleau, I think the best option right now for the Ducks is probably UC Jokinen. I think he does everything well, pretty much. He's good defensively. He doesn't have the speed he used to have. The goal scoring was a little bit off, but I think he's a good fit, for a second line guy on this Ducks team. Maybe a third line guy as well if you decide to. Depends on how the lineups match out this year. Obviously, we would assume Kessler, Silfverberg, and Cogliano are together. So either does he play on the left of Getzlaf and Eves, or does he play on the left of what we'd assume would probably be Raquel and Perry? It all depends. It'd be interesting to see, but I think he's the best option. Vanek, he's a goal scorer, but that's pretty much it. You'd have to shelter him on a line with Getzlaf and Eves, where he can just focus on offense, doesn't have to focus on too much defense. I think that would be the best spot for him. But really, I think that's why we haven't seen the Ducks do too much, is because I think they're focused on Marleau. I think that's their number one priority right now, and if they don't get him, I think if they decide to not go the free agent route, they would have to go for a trade if they were going to bring in a forward.
We have a fan question for Matthew about that too. He asks about the Ducks making a trade, and obviously the name, of course, that's come up for the last couple of weeks has been Vatanen. So he throws out Duchesne in there too. So he wonders, what do you think about a trade involving those two players? And we might as well just talk about any kind of trade. What do you think as far as if the Ducks don't go for a UFA, Marleau gets picked up for someone, and the Ducks don't want to pick any of these other players as we mentioned. What do you think as far as a trade, especially if it involves Vatanen?
I don't think for Duchesne, I don't think it's a realistic possibility anymore. Even if it was ever, I mean, the Ducks, Duchesne talks have picked up in the last few days, and the Ducks have been nowhere around that news whatsoever. It's been Columbus, it's been Nashville, and more recently it's been Boston. And you look at the offers that the rumored guys going back: Brendan Carlo from Boston, Ryan Murray from Columbus, possibly Ellis or Ekholm from Nashville. And I think Vatanen would fit into that type of player, but I'm not sure what the other pieces were. And obviously, if the Ducks aren't mentioning that, I'm sure they're just not interested in bringing in a guy like that at $6 million and having to worry about that contract and just I'm not sure they're 100% sold on getting rid of Vatanen yet, and I think they're still focused on this Marleau stuff. So and just getting involved in this Duchesne sweepstakes is messy. Obviously, Joe Sakic is holding out for as much as he can get, and I don't think the Ducks are interested in going that route. As for another trade, I mean, the rumors are always there around JVR in Toronto. I think that could still be a possibility. Obviously they've got Morgan Rielly, Nikita Zaitsev, Jake Gardiner as their top three. Just signed Ron Hainsey, but he'll probably fit into that bottom six with Connor Carrick. So they do still have a spot for a right-handed playmaking defenseman. So there's obviously something that could still work out there. They make similar contracts in Van Riemsdyk and Vatanen. So there's the chance for a deal to go through there. I don't know if it will. To me, I think the most interesting one, and there's been no rumors around it, but I was just looking at the cap for the Red Wings, and they've only got $3.5 million right now. Obviously, Franzen will probably go back on the long-term injured reserve once the season starts, but they still have to sign RFAs Thomas Tatar, Xavier Ouellet, and Andreas Athanasiou. So, that's not a lot of money left to sign a guy like Thomas Tatar, and we've heard a lot of the rumors of offer sheets for Leon Draisaitl, and there's obviously the stigma around the NHL that you can't offer sheet a guy because you're going to get it back in a couple seasons when you have to sign your own RFAs. But it won't happen. I doubt it. But I think a great option, in my opinion, for the Ducks would to be go out, offer sheet Tatar for more than the Red Wings have in cap. So offer sheet him at $4 million. The compensation is a first round and a third round pick of next season. And I honestly think that that's a great option. I mean, I doubt it happens because we never see teams offer sheet anybody anymore. The last one I think was Calgary offer sheeting Ryan O'Reilly, and before that it was Philadelphia offer sheeting Shea Weber. But I think it's a great opportunity. If you get him, you lose your first and third round pick. I don't think that's a too much to lose for a guy like Thomas Tatar. I think if you were to acquire him at the deadline, I think pretty much anybody would be happy giving away a outside of the lottery first round pick and a third round pick for a guy like Thomas Tatar. And he would immediately help the Ducks top six, and you don't have to lose Sami Vatanen. And really, I don't know if they do it. I doubt they do it. Like I said, you never really see a guy get offer sheeted, but if anybody's in a difficult position to sign a player right now, it has to be the Red Wings, and I think it'd be a great opportunity for the Ducks to go out and get a top six forward.
Yeah, I mean, that situation in Detroit is very, very interesting because they're stuck right now. They're going to have to do something. Like you said, you got those three guys to sign. Tatar, obviously Tatar was one that we had talked about, earlier this season as far as the Ducks trying to go get someone. I think we even talked about it before the season. So I agree with you. I doubt Murray does it, but I mean, if any team needs a forward right now and they've got, $4+ million, I would be sending an offer sheet over to Detroit right now. I mean, like you said, there's some kind of stigma with it. GMs don't like to do it because they're afraid that they're going to get retribution back when it's their turn to, sign an RFA. So it's very, very unlikely to do it. But it's funny that you mentioned that. We're looking through some of the teams and their cap situations before the show, and this was the one that stood out to us. And, if the Ducks need a forward and one that's going to fit, especially Tatar, 25 goals last season, he's averaging over 20 goals the last 4 seasons. That's a guy that the Ducks could try and do that move with, because obviously they can't, trade a Vatanen because Detroit doesn't even have the cap space to take that on. So that's a big one out there. But I think realistically, the Ducks are going to try to, win the Marleau sweepstakes, which I don't know if they will. And then if not, they're going to try to go with one of these other forwards that are out there. I mean, there's still some other, names out there that aren't necessarily left wings too. Not that the Ducks would go after these people. Iginla's out there, but he's getting up in age. Fisher, which I know a lot of us don't really like, especially after the playoffs last season, he's out there. Gianta as well. So, there's still other guys out there. I think the biggest problem with most of these, Eddie, is that they're up there in age. I think, like you said, Jokinen's probably one of the younger choices. I mean, most of these guys are getting up there. So yeah, the Ducks still need to do something, though. That was one of the other fan questions we had, Eddie, too, is given what the Ducks did on day one so far, what do you think how they'll do as far as getting to the Stanley Cup next season? And I think they can still go far. Obviously, getting Miller as the backup, keeping Eves. They got Holzer as their seventh defenseman, which isn't a big deal, but it's always good to have that seventh guy. I like the makeup of the team right now. I still think that they can win the Pacific and go far in the playoffs, but they're going to still need to add somebody, Eddie. I mean, they've got to do something, because if they don't, I just feel like they're one player away still.
Yeah, I mean, right now this is exactly the same team as last year, except Ryan Miller's replaced Jonathan Bernier, and you've lost Nate Thompson, but that's not a huge loss anyway. So it's exactly the same team as last year, so you would expect that they would be able to make the playoffs and do well. But you got to look at the other teams in the division too. Calgary's got a lot better. They had Travis Hamonic. They re-signed Michael Stone. Their defense is looking amazing in Calgary right now. They got Mike Smith in net. They've got Eddie Lack as well as a backup. Their forwards are obviously another year with more experience, and Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau and Sean Monahan and Sam Bennett. So they're going to be a good team next year, and they're going to challenge for a playoff spot. And obviously the Oilers under Connor McDavid are going to push for the Pacific Division title as well, just like they did last season. The Sharks will want to make a push. They're getting Joe Thornton back. It depends if they get Marleau back or not. Obviously with Brent Burns and Vlasic and Martin Jones, they're going to make a push. The Coyotes are a better team this year too, which is interesting. Obviously getting Stepan and Ranta and just that's a better team. I don't know if they're going to push for a spot, but it depends on how well Dylan Strome does there. So it's going to be difficult to play them. It always is. And then the Kings, you have to look at them as well. I mean, they'll probably push. Mike Camilleri might not be enough for them. They lost Brady McNabb. It's going to be difficult for them, but I think they'll push. There'll be a lot of teams pushing for playoff spots. Pretty much everybody except for Vancouver and probably Las Vegas now. So, that's 5 teams that you have to watch out for in that division, and it's going to be tough for them to make it, and I think they are, like you said, one piece away from really making themselves that much better, and it depends on where they get that from, whether it be Marleau, whether it be James Van Riemsdyk, like we said, could it be Thomas Tatar, could be somebody else like UC Okinen or another free agent. We'll have to wait and see, but I think they definitely need to add at least one more piece.
And speaking about the current situation with the team, this came up. It was kind of funny. We were talking about backup goalies this last week, and what the Ducks were going to do, and then the discussion got all turned up on Twitter and I think Facebook too, where we ended up talking about Perry, which always seems to come back up because Perry scored 19 goals last year. One of his lowest totals since. Really since 2006, when he had one in between there that was less, but that was the shortened season. But in terms of full seasons, since 2006, it's the first time that he's scored less than that. So one of the questions is do we think Perry will do better next season? Matt asks us that, and I think he will, Eddie. I think a lot of people put pressure on him. I think we put a little bit on there too, but. The thing is with Perry is you look at his stats. I mean, he had the same types of shots. He's still doing the same things. I just think in his game, maybe not going to the net as much, Eddie. I think he needs to do a little bit more of that this season. And that can help the Ducks too push, in the playoffs because, when the Ducks almost made it last time when they played, Chicago and missed out, one game away from the Stanley Cup final that year. I mean, he did remarkable in the playoffs, so and decent in the regular season. So that's what I see with Perry. I think he is going to do better. I don't think there's a lot of tweaks he needs to do. I just think he needs to get more, in front of the opposing goalie's crease and create havoc like we've seen him do before.
Yeah, and honestly, I think if he just, he could play similar to what he did last year in a way, and really things should start to trend upwards for him. I mean, he almost had an identical season in shots and time on ice to the season he had before that where he scored 34 goals and had 62 points, and nobody said he had a bad season that year. His shooting percentage was way down. It was 8.5%. You can say what you will and why it was like that this year. It could be luck. It could be the amount of the quality chances he was getting, the positions he was getting, and who knows. But usually guys will trend upwards towards their career average, which for Perry is 13.2. And really, for every season that he's had under 10% in a shooting percentage, he's scored under 20 goals, and the only two seasons he's done that were the 06-07 where he scored 17, and last year where he scored 19, and then obviously his rookie season where he scored 13. But every season other than that, he scored over 20 goals, and his shooting percentage has been over 10%, and I think it's going to trend upwards. And really, I mean, people are jumping to conclusions on a guy like Corey Perry because he makes the most money on the Ducks, and they compare salaries to guys like Crosby and other guys around the league, and say, well, if he's making this much, he should be producing at a higher level. And to some extent, I agree. And he obviously had an off season last year, but you got to give a guy a chance. It's one bad season for him. It's one bad season in the last 10 for Corey Perry, and I think he's going to most likely get over 20 goals next year, if not push for 30, depending on who he's playing with. And I think we're all going to forget about all this talk that we had last year. If he continues to shoot the puck at the same rate he did, if he continues to play around the same minutes that he did last season, he'll be fine come next season.
Yeah, I mean, he still had 19 goals. It's not terrible, but I know everyone else is going to say, well, yeah, he had 19, but hello, he had 30 the last two seasons and 40 before that. So, I mean, I get it. He needs to get back up to 25 to 30, and I think he will do that. I think he'll be fine. He had a lot more assists this year, which was a little bit different. He had 34 assists, which was not a career high, but up there in terms of some of his recent seasons. He had 39 back in 2013, but over the last 5 or 6 seasons, that's outside of that, it's been his highest. So he's still playing at a high level. Obviously, we want him to go at a little bit more of a higher level, which would help the Ducks this year too. And if the Ducks don't go out and get anybody, I mean, they can still make it. They can still go far. Like we talked about this year, injuries kind of killed the Ducks in that last series. Obviously, when you don't have Eves the whole series, Raquel gets hurt. Gibson's out those couple games. I mean, that killed the Ducks. So if the Ducks keep this team, don't get another significant forward, I still think they can win the division, and I still think they can go deep in the playoffs. It's just going to be a matter of them staying healthy. But I would like to get still, like we said, it's kind of the theme of the show, but we just need one more guy at least. If we have to settle and get 2 average guys, if we can't get a big name guy, that may be something the Ducks will have to look at doing. We've mentioned a lot of names out there. But in terms of cap space with 5.7, they may get one of these other guys below Marleau and then go get another depth type guy. But that's kind of the status of the Ducks right now, Eddie, where they're at. Some of the RFA news too. This past week, the Ducks did sign Magna and Boyle back, so they're with the team. Gortz and Sorensen are still out there. They've been given their qualifying offers. They haven't been picked up. And Edom and Ferreira are out in the wind. They haven't been picked up by anybody else. So that's kind of the status of the Ducks right now, Eddie. What do you think as far as the term, the Ducks' chances next season?
Yeah, I think if they don't get anybody, guys are definitely going to have to step up. We just talked about Perry. Obviously, he's going to have to step up and get back to his normal self and at least get over 20, 25, 30 goals this next season. Eves is going to have to come back and play well. I don't think he's going to get 30 goals. But if he can come back and get 15, 20 and just play a solid role for the Ducks, I think that's great for him. Silfverberg's going to have to play well. Raquel especially is going to have to come back and play similar, if not better, to how he played last year if they don't pick up any forwards. And guys that stepped up last year are going to have to continue to progress. I think Andre Kasher is going to have to continue to get better. Nick Ritchie's going to have to take another step forward. And then I think they'll be okay if they can do that. The defense is exactly the same. Montour hopefully doesn't have a slump like Theodore had last season. Hopefully he can come up and still play well, and then they'll be fine on defense. And then you've got guys like Jakob Larsson who could step up into the lineup. But I think they're in a good spot now. Don't get me wrong. I think they can challenge for a playoff spot for sure, and for the Pacific Division title. I just think we mentioned this in the playoffs and all throughout the season, even in the offseason so far, that they're kind of one big piece away from being that marquee contender. And we haven't really seen them get it. I don't know if Marleau is that big piece that can really push them over the top, but I think he definitely is he helps. And the one place the Ducks struggled last year was getting depth scoring from all the way throughout the lineup, and the fourth line really didn't get much going. The third line at times, depending on who was on it, didn't get much going. If you split up Raquel, Kessler, and Getzlaf, I think that fixes it a bit there, but maybe then putting Kasha and putting Vermette and putting Richie or whoever, even Shaw on the fourth line, that makes it a bit better, and you have at least some creativity and offense coming from that line. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I think the lineups dictated a lot. I think maybe if we see some guys make it out of camp, we've already talked about this, but we don't really see any of the forwards making it out of camp, but there's always a possibility, and that kind of really molds the lineup. It's a question that's easier to answer at the beginning of the season when we know what the lineup's going to look like, who's going to be playing where. But as of now, I think they're okay.
I agree. And, you talk about the younger guys coming up. The Ducks development camp is underway right now. The Ducks, they just had the one open day, July 2nd, at Anaheim Ice. That's already been going on. They had a practice and a scrimmage. We'll have some articles and updates on that after it's completed. And we've been posting some stuff. We've had different articles on some of the guys and the draft picks and whatnot. So follow that. We'll have all those on there. The only other news really this week, Eddie, was the Ducks assistant coaches. They did get two new faces for the Ducks, Steve Konowalchuk and Mark Morrison. So they joined the Ducks assistant coaches. Trent Yanni is still there. I know some people asked, they wondered where he went. I go, he didn't go anywhere. He's still there. So the Ducks added these two guys. Konowalchuk actually coached the Thunderbirds and Shea Theodore, so there's that connection there. And you also had Morrison. He was an assistant coach in the AHL for several seasons, and including the Manitoba Moose, which Carlisle was connected to that team. So you got some connections there with the Ducks already with both of these guys. They're going to come in, and I think it'll help too, Eddie. They should be able to get this team also going in the same direction as they were last season.
Yeah, I think it's great to have some fresh faces in there. I think Steve Konowalchuk's a great signing. I mean, he took the Seattle Thunderbirds, who were a good team in the Western Hockey League, but they weren't the best team. They came into the playoffs fourth, and he took them past some very good teams. He took them past Sam Steele's Regina Pats, who were the clear favorites, beat them in the Western Conference Championships, the Western Hockey League Championships, and took them to the Memorial Cup, where obviously they struggled and they didn't go far in the Memorial Cup. But, I mean, he's a great guy to bring in. I mean, he took a team that wasn't supposed to be that great and took them and coached them to a Western Hockey League Championship. So it's great to have him in there and his input. And then, obviously, bringing in a guy who has had some experience in the American Hockey League is always great. And I think it's just, to have some fresh faces, to have some new ideas in there, it's going to help things like the power play and like the penalty kill. And just, obviously Carlisle's had some history with these guys as well, so that will help. So it's something we have to wait and see how it plays out. But like I said, it's great to have some new guys behind the bench and some new ideas.
Yeah, and that's one thing we didn't talk about on this show. I mean, we've talked about it before, but as far as next season too, I think another big key, not just the roster. Obviously, we've harped on that for a good portion, but part of it's the specialty team play. That really dwindled towards the very end of the season, going into the playoffs. I mean, it was decent during the season, but it really struggled. So I think that's another key that they're going to have to work on, Eddie. And I think, like you said, bringing in fresh faces is going to help, because I really think the injuries and the specialty team, lack of the specialty teams is what hurt the Ducks, especially down the stretch last year.
Yeah, I mean that was something that struggled throughout the season at times, and definitely into the playoffs. I mean, I had points in the playoffs. The penalty kill was awful, and then the power play was awful. So there was and like you're looking at other teams and how they performed in special teams in the playoffs, and people were surprised the Ducks made it so far with how poor they were. And really, their 5-on-5 play is what saved them, and the ability to come back from different games, and that was the reason that they made it so far. And it was a complete turnaround from the season before that, where they were, I believe they finished first in both power play and penalty kill, and they had the same coaching staff behind the bench. So pretty much the same team makeup as well. And obviously losing Eves, and Raquel was a big part of the power play struggling at times during the playoffs. But you can't just put it on that. It was fairly bad throughout the entire playoffs. So yeah, bringing in the new faces, maybe a new system, depending on where you put guys on the power play and who they bring in, will hopefully help the Ducks move that up. But yeah, if you're going to go far in the playoffs, you have to have at least one of them has to be near the top, at least either the power play or the penalty kill, if not both.
Yeah, and that was the point. Like you said, it was, very inconsistent throughout the season. It wasn't, terrible that it was killing the team, but, it wasn't as good like you had mentioned the season before. It was just kind of up and down. They'd have some stretches of good specialty team play and then stretches of nothing. So that's another thing that I think that these assistant coaches coming in are going to help this team with as well. So with that, we're going to wrap up this show. I just want to remind you too, all the transactions that the Ducks do make are posted on the website. They are on the top of the Ducks and Pucks blog page on Facebook and on Twitter. There's a link on there. It's updated. Maybe not always right away, but all the stuff's on there. It'll be on there. So it's updated through all the moves through the first day of free agency. So check that out. Also check out the t-shirts, still selling those, tpnhockey.com. We still have some of the Manson shirts left that are going to charity as well. So check those out on the website. And with that, have a good 4th of July / Canada Day weekend, and we'll see you in a week or two. Let's go Ducks.